Before you count sheep, count mysteries.
For more than 26 years, she had no name. She wasn't remembered as a daughter, or a sister, or a friend to the world. She was simply known as Chelsea Jane Doe, a teenage girl whose life ended long before anyone knew who she truly was. When investigators discovered her body in 1999, they launched a desperate search for answers. Who was she? Where had she come from? And who had taken her life? Despite countless investigations, media coverage, and advances in forensic science, the mystery remained unsolved. Years turned into decades. New detectives took over the case. Technology continued to evolve, but her identity remained a secret. Until one remarkable breakthrough changed everything. Using a powerful technique known as genetic genealogy, investigators finally uncovered the truth. After nearly 26 years, Chelsea Jane Doe finally got her name back. She was Tiffany Bradley. But while one mystery had finally been solved, another still remained. Who murdered Tiffany Bradley? And why did it take more than 2 decades to discover who she was? This is the story of the mystery of Chelsea Jane Doe. On the morning of September 20th, 1999, a passing motorist noticed something unusual along Route 29 in Prince William County, Virginia. Just beyond the edge of the highway, hidden among the trees, lay the body of a young girl. Police quickly secured the scene. It became immediately clear that this was no accident. The victim had been brutally murdered. Investigators estimated she was between 14 and 19 years old. She had long brown hair, stood approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall, and had been dead for several days before she was discovered. But despite careful examination, there was one thing investigators couldn't determine: who she was. She carried no identification, no wallet, no personal belongings that could reveal her identity. There was nothing linking her to a missing persons report. Nothing that could tell detectives where she had come from, or who might be waiting for her to come home. The case immediately became one of Virginia's most puzzling mysteries. Forensic experts carefully documented every detail. Fingerprints were collected. DNA samples were preserved. Photographs were taken. Every possible clue was examined in the hope that someone, somewhere, would recognize the young victim. Investigators released descriptions to the public. Artists created facial reconstructions, hoping to give the unidentified teenager a face the world could recognize. Her image appeared on television, in newspapers, across missing persons databases. But no one came forward. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Still, there was silence. Without a name, the investigation faced an enormous obstacle. Detectives couldn't retrace her final days. They couldn't speak with family members. They couldn't identify friends, schools, or places she had lived. The victim remained a complete mystery. Unable to identify her, investigators gave the young girl a temporary name: Chelsea Jane Doe. A name created only because her real one had been lost. At least, that's what everyone believed. For the next 26 years, Chelsea Jane Doe would become one of America's most haunting unidentified murder victims. And despite the efforts of countless investigators, her true identity remained hidden. Until science finally caught up with the mystery. In almost every missing person case, someone is searching. A parent calls the police. A friend reports unusual behavior. A school notices a student never returned. Eventually, someone realizes a person has vanished. But in this case, that never happened. As weeks turned into months, investigators searched through missing persons reports across Virginia and neighboring states. They compared fingerprints, examined dental records, reviewed reports of missing teenage girls from across the country. Every possible lead was investigated. Every promising match was carefully examined. One after another, they were eliminated. Nothing fit. The young girl found in Prince William County seemed to exist without a past. Detectives couldn't understand it. How could someone so young disappear without anyone looking for her? The mystery became even more unsettling as investigators learned more about the victim. She appeared to have received dental care during her life. She had no obvious signs of living completely off the grid. There was nothing to suggest she had simply vanished without ever interacting with the outside world. Someone had known her. Someone had spoken to her. Someone had watched her grow up. Yet somehow, no one came forward. To keep the case alive, forensic artists created facial reconstructions based on her skull. The images were distributed across the United States. Television programs featured her story. Her information was uploaded to national databases of unidentified victims. Investigators hoped that one photograph, one newspaper article, or one television broadcast would reach the person who recognized her. But the phone never rang with the answer they were hoping for. As the years passed, Chelsea Jane Doe became one of America's most recognizable unidentified murder victims. True crime investigators discussed the case. Online communities searched for clues. Volunteers compared photographs of missing girls from decades earlier. The internet joined the investigation. Thousands of people wanted to give her back her name. But despite all those efforts, her identity remained a mystery. Eventually, the case grew cold. Not because detectives stopped caring, but because they had run out of leads. For more than 2 decades, Chelsea Jane Doe remained exactly what investigators had first called her: an unidentified victim. A teenage girl with no name. Until a new form of science offered investigators one final chance to uncover the truth. As the investigation continued, detectives refused to give up. Every unidentified victim leaves behind questions. But this case seemed to offer almost no answers. Investigators followed every lead they could find. Missing persons reports were reviewed again and again. New forensic artists created updated facial reconstructions as technology improved. DNA was entered into national databases. Fingerprints were compared against countless records. Each new advance in forensic science brought renewed hope. And each time, the result was the same. No match. Years passed. The detectives who had originally worked the case began retiring. New investigators inherited the files. Thousands of pages of reports. Crime scene photographs. Laboratory results. Witness statements. Every new detective asked the same questions. Who was Chelsea Jane Doe? Where had she come from? And why had no one reported her missing? As the years went by, the case attracted the attention of true crime communities across the internet. Amateur investigators analyzed every available detail. Some compared old missing persons reports. Others searched through yearbooks, family photographs, and newspaper archives. Dozens of theories emerged. Perhaps she had run away from home. Perhaps she had been living under a different name. Perhaps her family didn't know where to look. Or perhaps they didn't even know she was gone. None of the theories could be proven. The mystery only grew deeper. By the early 2020s, more than 2 decades had passed. For many cold cases, that would have marked the end. Memories fade. Evidence disappears. Witnesses move away, or pass away. Time becomes the greatest enemy of every investigation. But in this case, time would become something else. An unexpected advantage. Because while the case remained frozen, science continued to move forward. A revolutionary technique was beginning to solve mysteries once thought impossible. Not by questioning witnesses. Not by finding new fingerprints. But by following something far more personal. A family's DNA. And for Chelsea Jane Doe, that would change everything. For more than 2 decades, Chelsea Jane Doe remained unidentified. Every traditional investigative method had failed. Fingerprints, dental records, missing persons reports, facial reconstructions. None of them could answer the simplest question. Who was she? But while the case stood still, forensic science did not. In recent years, investigators began using a revolutionary technique known as genetic genealogy. Unlike traditional DNA analysis, which searches for an exact match in criminal databases, genetic genealogy works differently. Instead of looking for one specific person, it looks for relatives, even distant ones. When people submit their DNA to genealogy services, they often do so to learn about their ancestry or discover unknown family connections. With the proper legal authorization and cooperation from the databases that permit law enforcement access, investigators can sometimes compare DNA from unidentified victims to relatives who may have never known they could help solve a case. A distant cousin? A second cousin? Perhaps someone sharing only a small portion of the same family tree. By connecting thousands of tiny genetic clues, investigators can slowly work backwards through generations, building family trees, eliminating branches, searching historical records, following births, marriages, and deaths. It is painstaking work, sometimes taking months, sometimes years. But time after time, it has accomplished what once seemed impossible. It has given names back to people who had lost them. The technique had already solved several high-profile cold cases across the United States. Now, investigators hoped it could finally solve this one. Specialists extracted DNA from the evidence preserved since 1999. The sample was analyzed using modern technology that simply didn't exist when Chelsea Jane Doe was first discovered. Then, the waiting began. As genealogists traced one family connection after another, a picture slowly started to emerge. For the first time in nearly 26 years, detectives believed they were no longer searching for an unidentified victim. They were searching for one specific young woman. A teenager who had lived, had a family, and had a real name. The mystery that had survived for more than 2 decades was finally beginning to unravel. In the summer of 2025, after nearly 26 years, the mystery that had frustrated investigators for a generation finally reached a turning point. The young woman known only as Chelsea Jane Doe was identified. Her real name was Tiffany Bradley. For the detectives who had spent years working the case, it was a moment many had feared would never come. One of America's most haunting unidentified victims was unidentified no longer. Behind the name, Jane Doe, had always been a real person. A daughter. A family member. A life that had once been lived. For nearly 3 decades, that identity had remained hidden. Now, it had finally returned. The announcement marked the end of one mystery. But not the end of the investigation. Identifying Tiffany Bradley answered the question of who she was. It did not answer the question that mattered just as much. What happened to her? Investigators began reconstructing Tiffany's life in the hope that her identity would reveal new leads. Where had she been before her death? Who had she spent time with? Who was the last person to see her alive? Every answer had the potential to move the investigation one step closer to the truth. After years of referring to an unidentified victim, detectives could finally investigate a real person's history. Friends could be located. Family members could be interviewed. Old records could be revisited with entirely new context. The case had changed completely. For Tiffany's loved ones, the identification brought emotions that are difficult to describe. Grief, relief, heartbreak, and perhaps most importantly, certainty. For 26 years, there had been questions without answers. Now, at least one of those questions had finally been resolved. She was no longer Chelsea Jane Doe. She was Tiffany Bradley. But while science had succeeded in restoring her identity, it had not identified the person responsible for taking her life. And that meant the search for justice was far from over. For nearly 26 years, she was known only as Chelsea Jane Doe, a name created by investigators because they had nothing else. No family, no confirmed identity, no history. Just a young girl whose real name had disappeared. Then, everything changed. Using genetic genealogy, investigators followed a trail that had remained invisible for decades. Piece by piece, family by family, the mystery began to unravel. Eventually, the evidence pointed to one person. The girl known as Chelsea Jane Doe was Tiffany Bradley. For investigators, it was an extraordinary breakthrough. One of the longest-running unidentified victim cases in Virginia had finally reached an answer. The announcement marked the end of a mystery that had lasted for nearly 26 years. But it also raised the difficult question: how had a teenage girl remained unidentified for so long? Detectives began retracing Tiffany's life. Every school record, every known address, every family connection, every person who may have crossed paths with her during the final days of her life. For the first time, they weren't searching for an unknown victim. They were investigating the murder of a real person with a real identity. The identification also meant something far more personal. For decades, Tiffany had existed in public memory only as a forensic reconstruction and a temporary name. Now, she was remembered as someone's daughter, someone's relative, someone whose life had mattered long before her death. After 26 years, she had finally been given back the one thing that had been taken from her: her name. But while one mystery had finally been solved, the most important question remained unanswered. Who killed Tiffany Bradley? And could identifying her finally lead investigators to the person responsible? Because giving a victim their name back is only the first step toward justice. For decades, the greatest mystery surrounding Chelsea Jane Doe was her identity. Today, we know her name. She was Tiffany Bradley. But knowing who she was doesn't tell us who took her life. Despite the breakthrough in identifying Tiffany, her murder remains unsolved. Investigators continue searching for answers. Every new piece of information is carefully examined. Every lead is followed. Every tip is investigated. Because somewhere, someone knows what happened. Someone knows how Tiffany's life came to such a tragic end. Whether that person has remained silent out of fear, loyalty, or guilt, only they know. Cases like Tiffany's remind us that justice doesn't always arrive quickly. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes decades. And sometimes it depends on advances in science that investigators could never have imagined when a case first began. Genetic genealogy has transformed criminal investigations around the world. It has restored names to countless unidentified victims, reunited families with loved ones they thought they'd never find, and reopened cold cases that had long been considered impossible to solve. But science has its limits. DNA can reveal a victim's identity. It can point investigators in the right direction. It can uncover hidden family connections. What it cannot do is explain why a crime happened, or identify every person responsible. Those answers still depend on evidence, witnesses, and sometimes someone finally deciding to speak. Today, Tiffany Bradley is no longer remembered as an anonymous victim. She is remembered as a young woman whose story refused to be forgotten. Her identification proved that even after 26 years, the truth can still emerge. But one chapter of her story remains unwritten. Who killed Tiffany Bradley? Until that question is answered, the investigation continues. And somewhere, the person responsible may still believe they've escaped justice. History has shown that many cold cases are solved when people least expect it. New evidence appears. Old witnesses come forward. Technology improves. And secrets that remained hidden for years finally come to light. Perhaps one day, the final mystery in Tiffany Bradley's story will be solved. Until then, her family, the investigators, and everyone who followed this case continue waiting for the one answer that still matters most. For nearly 26 years, the world knew her only as Chelsea Jane Doe, a name created out of necessity, a placeholder for someone whose identity had been lost. Today, we know the truth. She was Tiffany Bradley, a young woman with a family, a past, and a life that mattered. For investigators, identifying Tiffany was more than a scientific achievement. It was a promise fulfilled. A promise that no victim should remain anonymous forever. Advances in forensic science gave Tiffany something that time had taken away. Her identity. Her story. Her name. But justice is about more than knowing who the victim was. It is about finding the person responsible. And that mystery remains unsolved. Somewhere, someone knows exactly what happened in the days before Tiffany's body was discovered. Someone knows why her life was taken. Whether that person has stayed silent for decades, or believes the truth will never come to light, no one knows. Cold cases have a way of surprising us. Evidence once thought insignificant can suddenly become crucial. A forgotten witness may finally come forward. New technology can reveal what older methods could not. Again and again, cases once believed impossible to solve have finally reached their conclusion. Perhaps Tiffany Bradley's story will be one of them. Perhaps one day, the person responsible will finally face justice. Until then, her case serves as a reminder that every unidentified victim is more than a case file, more than a forensic reconstruction, More than a headline. Behind every Jane Doe is a real person. Someone who laughed, dreamed, loved, and was loved in return. For 26 years, Tiffany Bradley waited to have her name returned. Now, only one mystery remains. Who killed her?